Emily Rhodes hadn't been inside a hospital since her mother died, but when she took the night shift at Crestwood Memorial, she didn't realize she'd never truly leave. From the moment she stepped into the dimly lit East Wing, something was wrong. Doors opened on their own. Patients long deceased still had charts. And every night, she caught glimpses of a faceless figure watching from the end of the hallway. Now, Emily's reality is unraveling. Drawings of her appear in rooms that should be empty. Her reflection doesn't blink, and the hospital seems to know her better than she knows herself, because Crestwood doesn't just care for the dying, it keeps them. I never wanted to take the night shift. I was fresh out of nursing school, desperate for work, and Crestwood Memorial Hospital was the only place that called me back. It didn't matter that the hospital had a reputation. I needed the paycheck, and they needed someone to cover the overnight hours in the East Wing. No one else wanted that assignment. I figured it couldn't be that bad, but the first time I stepped inside the building, I felt it like something heavy settled on my chest. The air was thick and stale, like a room that hadn't been opened in years. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just nerves. Crestwood was old. Parts of it had been modernized, but not the East Wing. That section had been left mostly untouched, and it showed. The floors were a dull yellow tile, cracked in places. The walls were an off-white that looked more gray than anything else. The lights overhead flickered when you walked beneath them, and the hallway stretched out long and quiet, broken only by the occasional beep from a heart monitor or the shuffle of a patient's slippered feet. I told myself it was just the atmosphere, nothing to worry about. But every night I worked there, I felt like I was being watched, not by the patients, by the building itself. Most of the rooms in the East Wing housed patients in palliative care, people with no family, no visitors, no real chance of getting better. A few were lucid, but most were sedated or nonverbal. Their names weren't always listed on the door, just numbers. I always thought that was strange. It made the patients seem more like inventory than people. Still, I did my job. I checked vitals, changed full bags, made notes, but weird things started happening after my first week. I'd leave a wheelchair in the hallway and it would be somewhere else when I came back. My clipboard vanished once during a double round, only to reappear hours later in a room I hadn't entered all night. I kept hearing sounds over the intercom, two brief crackles, sometimes whispering or faint breathing, like someone was holding the receiver too close. I asked about it once during shift change. The head nurse just gave me this tired look and said, "Old wiring. This place has a mind of its own." I didn't sleep much those weeks. I'd take short naps in the break room, but I never felt rested. I kept thinking about what I'd seen or thought I'd seen out of the corner of my eye. A woman, pale, wearing a hospital gown, her hair long and tangled, her posture stiff like a mannequin. She never moved, just stood at the far end of the hallway, watching, but whenever I turned my head, she'd be gone. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe a shadow. Lack of sleep messes with your head. That's what I kept telling myself. Then came the night I passed room 209. The light was on. I knew for a fact it shouldn't have been. The patient, Mr. Keller, had passed away 2 days earlier. The room was cleared and locked, but the door was ajar. I stepped inside, heart racing. It was ice cold. The bed was made, but the chair beside it had been turned to face the corner of the room. On the pillow sat a single piece of folded paper. No name, no message, just a childlike drawing of a faceless figure standing under a broken ceiling light. I didn't know what to do with it, so I folded it again and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't tell anyone. I was scared they'd think I was imagining things. Maybe I was. But when I left that morning and reached into my pocket for my car keys, the paper was gone. In its place was a faint black stain where the ink had bled into my scrubs. I could still see the shape of that figure if I looked long enough. And that S when I realized something that chilled me even more each time I passed the mirror in the hallway. My reflection didn't always blink when I did. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just fatigue, maybe stress. Night shifts mess with your head in ways you don't fully understand until you've done them for a while. Your sleep becomes irregular, your appetite fades, and sometimes your mind wanders into dark places. I kept telling myself that over and over. But the image of that faceless figure stayed with me. Even after washing the scrub top twice, the ink stain didn't come out. It was faint, like a shadow that refused to lift. I started keeping it in my locker, hoping that out of sight would mean out of mind. It didn't. Things got worse during my second week. It wasn't just strange feelings anymore, it was physical. The hallway lights began cutting out whenever I walked through them, sometimes plunging me into total darkness for several seconds. Elevators would stop at floors I hadn't pressed, and once, the doors opened to nothing but pitch black. I didn't step inside. I took the stairs, heart pounding, every creak of the metal railing sounding too loud, too deliberate. One night around 2 a.m., I was restocking the linen cart when I heard what I thought was a patient calling out. It was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, repeating the same word over and over. Help. It was coming from room 213. I checked my tablet. That room was supposed to be empty. Still, I approached slowly, telling myself someone must have wandered in by mistake. I reached for the door handle, and before I could touch it, the door creaked open on its own. I stood there, frozen. Inside, the room was dark, no lights, no machines running, just the soft rustle of bedsheets being disturbed. I called out, asking if someone needed assistance, but there was no response, just that same low whisper. Help. I stepped in. The air felt wrong, dense and electric, like the atmosphere before a storm. The bed was unmade, and on the floor, next to the overturned tray table, was another piece of paper, folded in half. I picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it. Another drawing, this one more detailed. The same faceless figure, but now it was standing in a hallway that looked exactly like the east wing. Fluorescent lights above, the cracked tile below, and just beneath the figure, in shaky handwriting, "She's still here." That was the first time I truly considered quitting. I spent the rest of that shift going through the motions, avoiding that end of the hall, keeping my back to the walls. I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about who could have drawn those images. A former patient, a prank from another staff member. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. There was something here, something unseen, watching from behind doors that were supposed to be closed. The final straw came the next morning. I was clocking out, walking through the staff corridor toward the exit. There's a large mirror just before the door to the parking lot. I glanced at it like I always did, just a quick check before heading out. But this time I noticed something behind me. A shadow, slightly hunched, bare feet, long dark hair that hung like wet vines around a pale face I couldn't fully see. I spun around. The hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, there was nothing there. I told myself I'd take a break, just a few days off, clear my head, get some sleep, maybe talk to someone. But when I got home and pulled my keys from my bag, something small fluttered to the ground. Another drawing, folded tight. This one showed a hospital bed with someone in it, someone who looked exactly like me, and written underneath, in smeared black ink, "You never left." I didn't go back to Crestwood after that night. I called in sick the next day, then again the day after. I lied and said I had the flu, but the truth was, I couldn't even bring myself to drive past the hospital. I didn't sleep much either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that drawing, the hospital bed, the figure in it that looked too much like me, the message underneath, "You never left." I kept telling myself it was stress, just a combination of exhaustion and fear feeding off each other. But there was something about those drawings that felt too specific, too personal, like someone or something knew me, was watching me. I stayed in my apartment with the curtains drawn and my phone on silent, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it followed me. I'd wake up at night thinking I heard the distant hum of hospital machinery, that low, rhythmic beeping I'd learned to tune out during my shifts. I heard it once in the bathroom while brushing my teeth. I turned off the faucet and listened, heart pounding. The sound was gone. But it happened again the next night in the hallway, this time faint, almost hidden beneath the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. I began to wonder if maybe I was losing my grip, if the hospital had gotten inside my head more than I realized. After a few days, I forced myself to leave the apartment, just a short walk around the block to clear my mind. The air outside felt lighter somehow, but it didn't help, because when I returned, there was something slipped under my door, a folded paper, just like before. My name was scrawled across the front in shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I'd find. Another drawing. This time it was my apartment. The layout was unmistakable, my couch, my kitchen table, even the crooked light fixture above the hallway. And standing in the doorway of the bedroom, that same faceless figure, only now it had something in its hand, a piece of paper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment turned on, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. At least, not until around 3 a.m. when I heard the buzzing. At first I thought it was my phone, but it was coming from the bathroom. I crept toward the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. The buzzing grew louder, sharper, like static. I pushed the door open slowly. The light was already on. My bathroom mirror was covered in condensation, though I hadn't used the shower. And in the center of the fogged-up glass, something had been drawn with a finger. The same figure again, simple, childlike but unmistakable. Beneath it, just 3 words. "Go back now." I stood there staring at it for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking, my mouth dry. Go back now. It felt less like a command and more like a warning. But I didn't understand it. Go back to the hospital. Why? To what? The place that had followed me into my own home. The next morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out, but the voicemail was only a few seconds long. No voice, just that same quiet breathing I'd heard on the hospital intercom. That was enough for me. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and drove. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away. From my apartment, from Crestwood, from whatever this was. But when I stopped at a rest area a few hours later to collect myself, I opened my glove box to grab a map, and there it was. Another drawing. This one was different. The figure was no longer standing. It was lying in a bed, tubes in its arms, surrounded by machines, and above it scrawled in red ink that smeared where my fingers touched it, still inside. I didn't drive any farther after finding that last drawing. I just sat there in the rest stop parking lot, staring at it, trying to understand what it meant. Still inside, those words ran in circles through my head, over and over, until they stopped feeling like a warning and started to feel like a sentence. I kept thinking about the bed in the picture, the tubes, the machines, the way the figure wasn't faceless anymore. It had features this time, soft, faded lines. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized it looked exactly like me. Something was deeply wrong. The drawings weren't just threats or messages anymore. They were showing me something, telling me something, but I couldn't make sense of it. All I knew was that running wasn't helping. Wherever I went, it followed the figure, the whispers, the breathing. I could feel it even now, like the air had a weight to it, pressing down on my shoulders. Like someone else was in the car with me, just outside my line of sight. I drove back home just after sunrise. I told myself I was done being scared, that I was going to figure this out once and for all. But the moment I stepped through my apartment door, I knew something had changed. The air inside felt heavier than before, thicker. The lights flickered once and then stayed dim, like they were struggling to stay on. There was a low hum coming from somewhere, soft and constant. It reminded me of a generator. Or a ventilator, I couldn't tell. Everything looked the same, my couch, my kitchen, the hallway leading to my room, but it felt different, like I wasn't in my apartment anymore. Like something had shifted. I walked into my bedroom, and that's when I saw it. The mirror on my closet door was covered in more of those same foggy smears, but this time, they weren't random. They formed shapes, dozens of small figures, all with blank faces, all lined up in a row, and above them one single phrase scratched into the glass: they never left. I felt the floor shift beneath me, just slightly, like the ground wasn't solid. I backed out of the room, heart racing. I didn't want to be there anymore. I needed answers. I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. Against every instinct in my body, I made a decision. I was going back to Crestwood. I arrived just after midnight. The front entrance was locked, so I used the employee keycard that I never bothered to return. The lobby was silent, and the security desk was empty. No cameras, no guard. I moved quickly through the corridors, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Everything looked the same, aged walls, flickering lights, but it felt even colder than before, like the entire building was asleep. The east wing was darker than I remembered. The hallway lights didn't flicker this time. They were off completely. I used the flashlight on my phone to guide me. I passed each room slowly. 212, 211, 210. When I reached 209, I stopped. The door was already open. Inside, the bed was made. The room was clean, empty, no sign of the drawing, no trace of the cold. But on the floor, near the chair by the window, there was a small object. I knelt down and picked it up, another folded piece of paper. My name was written on it again, but this time the paper wasn't drawn on. It was a photograph, a picture of me, lying in a hospital bed, eyes closed, tubes in my arms, machines behind me, and just behind the glass window in the picture, barely visible, was the same faceless figure, watching. My breath caught in my throat because the photo wasn't old. It wasn't stained or faded. It was recent. The date on the corner showed it had been printed just 2 days ago. I stared at the photo, unable to breathe. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be real, but it was me. Not just someone who looked like Mimi. Same haircut, same uniform, even the same tiny scar on my right temple from when I fell off my bike as a kid. And I wasn't just lying in that bed, I was unconscious, hooked up to machines, pale and motionless, like I'd been there for a while. The photo looked like it had been taken through a hospital window, the angle slightly tilted as if someone had been watching from the hallway. And standing just behind the glass, still and silent, was that same faceless figure. It hadn't moved. It had always been there. I dropped the photo. My fingers had gone numb. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out the silence of the hospital. I backed away from the room and stumbled into the hallway, suddenly aware of how wrong everything felt. The walls seemed to stretch further than before. The overhead lights didn't flicker anymore. They buzzed softly, like they were waiting for something. I checked my phone. No signal, no time displayed. Just a black screen. Like the battery had died, but I knew it hadn't. The air felt thicker now, harder to breathe. I began walking faster, trying to make it back to the lobby, back to the front door, but the halls didn't feel familiar anymore. Every turn led to another corridor I didn't recognize. Room numbers were missing or scrambled. One hallway seemed to loop back on itself, no matter how far I walked. It was as if the building had shifted in the time I'd been gone, or maybe I was never supposed to leave in the first place. That thought hit me hard. Never left. The phrase echoed in my mind, all those notes and whispers suddenly making a horrible kind of sense. What if I hadn't left the hospital that night? What if everything since then, the apartment, the drawings, the messages, wasn't the outside world at all, but something else, a dream, a coma, some kind of purgatory wrapped in the memory of my old life? I didn't know, but the deeper I moved into the hospital, the less real things felt. My legs were shaking. I passed a window and saw only darkness outside, not the parking lot or streetlights, just black, like there was nothing beyond the building. I turned a corner and found myself face to face with room 213 again. The same door I'd opened when I first heard the whisper. It was wide open now. The room was glowing faintly, lit by the pulse of a monitor that beeped slowly, steadily. I stepped inside. The bed was occupied. It was me, lying still, eyes closed, breathing shallow, tubes in both arms, machines humming softly. I stared at myself, frozen. Everything around me felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My knees gave out and I sank into the chair beside the bed. There was no one else in the room, no doctors, no nurses, just me and the machine keeping me alive. The same machine I'd been hearing for weeks. I didn't know how to feel. Fear gave way to something colder. Resignation. Then I heard it, breathing, not from the bed, from behind me. I turned slowly and there it was, the faceless figure standing in the corner, still watching, but this time it moved. Its head tilted slightly, just like it had when I first saw it in the hallway, and in its hands, it held another piece of paper. It placed it on the edge of the bed and disappeared, vanishing like smoke. I reached out and unfolded it with trembling hands. The final drawing. It was me again, still in the bed. But this time, the machines were flatlined, and in the doorway, drawn larger than ever before, was the faceless figure, now with one hand stretched out, and beneath the drawing, in red ink, time to choose.